Welcome to this explainer. I'm your host, and today, well, we're going to unpack one of the most profound, systematic shifts in global power in modern history. We are looking at a transformation that completely rewired the world we live in. And to really do it justice, we need to take a highly calculated, objective look at the geopolitical board. So settle in. I want you to really think about the sheer scale of the narrative we're about to explore. Because this isn't just some dry economic report. No, this is the story of an entire civilization literally re-engineering itself. I want to pose this question directly to you right out of the gate. How exactly did a broke, starving nation conquer the global economy in just a few decades? Let that sink in for a second. It's a question that honestly just defies standard historical logic. Today, we're going to trace this incredibly cinematic, chronological journey. We'll break down the architecture of this rise using the hard data and those key historical checkpoints that made it all possible. Okay, let's dive into this. Phase 1, the Century of Shadows. To understand where China is now, we have to start at the absolute bottom. For roughly 100 years, China was essentially a broken giant. They call this era the Century of Humiliation. Starting in the mid-19th century, the country was just systematically shattered. We're talking about a time defined by foreign warships patrolling the rivers, the absolute devastation of opium dens, massive invasions by Western empires, and violent internal rebellions that just bled the country dry. They were carved up by foreign concessions, which left the nation functionally broke and entirely isolated from the rest of the industrializing world. This shadow era spanned all the way from the Opium Wars in 1839 to 1949 when the People's Republic was declared. But even then, under this incredibly strict, iron-fisted Soviet-style central planning, the economy just completely stagnated. The country suffered from catastrophic famines. To the rest of the globe, China was basically just a tragic, closed box. But what the outside world completely failed to realize was that inside that closed box, a massive, desperate survival instinct was quietly hardening. Let's move on and see how this builds. Phase 2, the Great Opening. Pure ideology does not feed a billion people. This was the harsh, practical truth realized by Deng Xiaoping when he took the wheel back in 1978. The turning point for China didn't happen on some chaotic battlefield. It happened in a quiet conference room. He looked out at his broken country and understood that fundamental changes were absolutely crucial for survival. But here's the critical distinction. He didn't tear down the state to make this happen. Instead, he calculatedly re-engineered the whole shebang right from the inside out. To pull this off, he opened the doors to foreign capital through a few very specific steps. First, establishing these special economic zones along the coast. Then, they offered the West a deal that was just irresistible. They basically said, give us your factories, your technology, and your blueprints, and in exchange, we'll give you the most massive, disciplined, and cheapest labor force in human history. And wow, did the West take the bait? Western corporations, completely blinded by the pursuit of short-term profits, flooded into these zones. They saw an amazing opportunity for a low-cost workforce, totally unaware that they were, quite literally, handing over the keys to the global kingdom. And this brilliantly illustrates our next shift. Phase 3, the Factory of the World. The moment the trap finally snapped shut, that happened in December 2001, when China officially joined the World Trade Organization. This wasn't just some dry policy update. It was the catalyst for an economic explosion unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. 10% annual economic growth. Let me repeat that. Between 1978 and the 2010s, China's economy grew at this almost impossible average every single year. They transformed into the undisputed factory of the world. Think about your own life during that time. If you wore it, played with it, or plugged it in, chances are it was stamped Made in China. It was absolute market saturation. But listen, Beijing was never going to be content just assembling plastic toys forever. They implemented this highly effective dual-track strategy. Grasp the heavy, release the light. What does that mean? Well, they kept strict, total state control over the heavy, critical sectors. Think steel, energy, and banking. Meanwhile, they released the light, allowing cutthroat, private competition to absolutely thrive in the tech and consumer sectors. It was, honestly, a perfectly balanced economic engine. Now, while this economic engine roared, we have to look at what was happening on the other side of the globe. The United States spent the early 2000s burning trillions, literally trillions, of dollars in endless attrition wars in the Middle East. It was a massive, unprecedented expenditure of national wealth and focus. Now, what's really interesting about this contrast is how China reacted. While the West was entirely consumed by short-term attrition and costly foreign conflicts, China stayed incredibly quiet. Every single dollar of profit they made wasn't wasted. It was aggressively, almost violently reinvested back into their own country. They saved, they waited, and they built. We're talking thousands of miles of high-speed rail, massive deep-water ports, and entirely modern megacities built quite literally from scratch. So, where does that leave us today? Phase 4, the hyperpower era. If you still hold on to the old stereotype of China as just a cheap copycat manufacturing hub, well, you need to discard that immediately. That stereotype is entirely dead. Today, China alone commands over 30% of total global manufacturing output. To put that into perspective, that is equal to the United States and the entire European Union combined. It's a truly staggering centralization of global production. And the craziest part? It's not just traditional manufacturing. Look at the industries of the future. China dominates 40% of the world's renewable energy capacity. They've established almost complete control over the global supply chains that matter most for the next century. We're talking electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and the rare earth minerals required to build them. To secure all of this, they launched the massive Belt and Road Initiative. They've been quietly weaving this unprecedented infrastructure web all across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And by doing this, they've effectively secured the planet's raw resources for the next 100 years. They didn't just join the system of global capitalism, they mastered it. So the crucial point is this. Phase 5, Return of the Kingdom. You often hear Western analysts looking at China today, trying to predict its impending collapse by pointing to a real estate crisis or shrinking demographics. But those analysts, they're making a fundamental error. They're foolishly attempting to measure a 5,000-year-old civilization by the metrics of a quarterly economic report. To really understand their perspective, you have to understand this specific term, 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻. It translates to the Middle Kingdom. You see, for centuries, China viewed itself as exactly that, the absolute center of the world. From Beijing's perspective, this phenomenal 40-year rise isn't some new, surprising phenomenon. It's simply a return to the natural order of things. The century of humiliation is officially closed, which leaves the rest of us looking at a dramatically shifted geopolitical landscape. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to really chew on. What happens when the dragon decides it's no longer just time to build, but time to rule? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.